Okay. So I would like to introduce Professor Ahmed Legrouri. He's a Moroccan. He's in Africa. We just talk about it. And after he got his Bachelor of Science in Morocco, he moved to France first to get his doctorate degrees from a very well-known institute, National Polytechnic Institute in Toulouse, France. And then he moved again to Glasgow in United Kingdom to get his PhD. So he really did very, very well. So he got what he has to go from France and then from UK, which is a very intelligent way to do his career. He is currently a provost and vice president for academic affairs at the International University of Grand Bassam, Côte d'Ivoire. He served as professor at Al Akhawa University in Morocco. It's a university working with speaking English, which is very well known again. Academic coordinator and dean of the School of Science and Engineering there. He also served as academic coordinator. His research interests include intercalation compound. Just this morning, Professor Ben Youssef talked about this, about 2D material. So intercalation compound is a very important issue. Biomaterial, environment and education. He has developed experience in quality assurance in higher education and contribute to the production and implementation of strategic plan and the international accreditation system of his university. He served as expert with UNESCO on education and sustainable development, the UNASCWA on integrated water resources management, and ECOWAS on harmonization of degree and certificate. He also served as member of several scientific advisory committee and received several international fellowship. I think his experience now in research and development and education is huge. And I think the virtual learning university, we are really happy to have him with us because we can learn from him a lot, as he gave a lot now to the continent, to Africa. So he will talk about a very interesting subject, which in principle should enter our Minister of Education should be there to hear about high quality, high education and scientific research to serve Africa development. Professor Ahmed Legrouri, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours. Can you open the... Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Ahmed Nawi. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to contribute to this important conference. And I would like first to thank you, Professor Nawi, Professor Salim Omar, Professor Morabit, and all the friends and the colleagues from the Virtual Learning University. And thank also the organizers of the International Exhibition of Solar Energy and Energy Efficiency for giving me this opportunity to speak. So my presentation, and it is projected. Do you see the slides?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. So I have, I would say, 6 little paragraphs. I might fly over things because for the sake of time, I will not go into details, but I'll be happy to address any questions and also share my presentation with the colleagues. As an introduction, everyone is aware today of the importance of education as a means for a broad social welfare, economic development, and poverty alleviation or even poverty eradication. The relevance and the contribution of education, particularly higher education scientific research, to economic, social, and political development is well recognized in today's world. In 2015, the United Nations issued the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17. One of them, the fourth one, is devoted to education. And when we look in this fourth SDG, the target 4.3 says that by 2030, ensure equal access for all women and men to affordable quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including university. We will see later that we are far away. We are not far from 2030, but we are far away from reaching the targets for, at least for education. So the importance of the relevance and quality of higher education and scientific research is today a priority for most nations. And you mentioned the minister, and I know actually personally some ministers in Morocco, and everyone is working hard to improve actually the quality of the offerings. But the challenge is huge. Today, we are actually in a fast advancing digital era, and the institutions today are required to provide new skills and abilities to the youth. And there was a report, and there are several reports that talk about this, about actually in order to achieve sustainable growth and be successful, we need to change our paradigms. And within this international context, several initiatives were launched and taken in many African countries to experiment new higher education and scientific research models and paradigms. So Africa, in the international context, you may have seen this map, which shows that Africa is a very large continent. On the map of Africa, you can insert China, India, most of Europe, USA, and so on. And Africa is a huge, rich, and young continent. I will put the emphasis on the word young, because the median age in Africa is 18 years, compared to 42 for Europe, 35 in North America, and so on. So I will not talk about the other resources, because Africa is very rich in terms of natural resources. There is one challenge: the working age population increased today in Africa. There were 705 million in 2018, and they may reach 1 billion by 2030. So the youth is a great opportunity for the continent if they receive quality education, if they are well trained. Otherwise, they constitute a major threat to the development of the countries. And one major challenge, I mentioned it earlier, is unemployment of the youth. So in this presentation, I will talk about, because I will do some little diagnosis of the situation in terms of higher education and scientific research, but I must say that the African countries differ significantly. There are huge gaps and huge differences between countries in Africa, and that's why we cannot generalize. So the education is very important, and I mentioned earlier the SDG 4 of the United Nations to eradicate, I would say, to have everyone in school by 2030. And when we look at the rate of children, adolescents, and young people out of school, primary and secondary education, 31% of them in Africa. The average word is 17. North Africa is at 15%. So it is, I would say, I can venture into saying that is almost impossible to reach that target by 2030. Of course, education is constitutes major components in the Human Development Index. And as you can see on the map, the red refers to the countries that have low human development index. There are only few countries in Africa that are in the, there is one in the very high, which is the Seychelles. And then we have few in the high level of HDI. And most of them are either in the medium, low, or very low. Higher education and scientific research. We must recall that Africa hosts the oldest universities in the world, Al-Qarawiyyin in Fes in Morocco, and Al-Azhar in Cairo in Egypt. So today, Africa is aware of the benefits of higher education scientific research. However, both numbers and quality need improvements. Figures, again, data for higher education. The enrollment rate in tertiary education, including universities, is at 9% in Africa, when the average of the world is 39%. If we look at what is going on in Africa, that's why I mentioned earlier that there are a lot of differences between countries in Africa. North Africa, for example, Morocco is at 38%, or 39% actually, is like the average of the world. The Arab states are at 34%. So it's mainly sub-Saharan African countries that are actually suffering from this phenomenon. Cote d'Ivoire is at 9%. So even though the number of students have almost doubled between 2009 and 2020, the problem is still there. And if we consider gender, then the problem is more acute. If we look at women in higher education scientific research, the rural areas, then they are at disadvantage compared to men and cities. We talked about the quantity, the figures, now the quality of higher education. People argue about the rankings, but actually they're there and they affect us. And when we look at the African academic and research institutions, not a single African university is amongst the 100 academic institutions in most of the rankings: Shanghai, Times Higher Education, QS, Webometrics, and so on. If we look at the Shanghai, for example, only 5 universities are amongst the top 500 universities in the world, with Morocco having none. This is the equivalent of a small little country like Hong Kong. Look at the 500 top universities in the Times Higher Education ranking, only 7 universities. Morocco, 1 university, which is the University Sidi Mohammed Abdullah in Fes. And this may be the equivalent of Belgium or even the Netherlands has more than that. In terms of innovation, that's a big problem also. In terms of research, the production in science and engineering in 2018, this is data taken from the National Science Foundation in the US. Then Africa contributed only 3.3% to the world production in science and engineering. And unfortunately, most of this production is done in only a few countries. South Africa and Egypt, 47% of that, and North Africa, almost 50% of that. We look at innovation, the country that produces the largest number of patents and intellectual property is Egypt. In Africa is Egypt, and it produces just a little bit more than a small country like Belgium. Again, the ranking, the Global Innovation Index, does not give us good insight about what is going on in Africa in terms of innovation. And of course, money is not well spent, or is not there sometimes, but sometimes even when it is there, it's not always spent on innovation. And when we look at the gross domestic expenditure on research and development, Korea, 4.80% of their GDP is used for research. The average of the world is 1.72. And then when we look at sub-Saharan Africa, it's 0.38. North Africa, maybe a little bit less than 1%. There are several reasons, and I think that most of the African countries did their good diagnosis of their situation. And some of the reasons are lack of funding, facilities, and research experienced faculty. And the problem is that the environment for research and development is not well established in those countries, to the point that we even lose today some cream of the crop. And sometimes we train them in the country. We train actually some young researchers who are excellent, and then they flee their country to go to developed world, to Europe, the United States, Canada, and so on. That's a big problem. And this is due to the absence of incentives and accountability. We still have a lot of mismanagement in our systems. And then we depend on international support. For most of my research, I've done it actually, and the papers I published, the modest papers I published, it was done through support from international organizations. And then the working language, countries that do not use English today are at a big disadvantage. And when you look at rankings in Africa, most of the, I would say, the countries that rank well are Anglophone. So we need actually to see how we can increase the use of English in our countries that do not use English as a language of instruction and work. And I put this slide here to show that it is very important to use that language. When we look at countries today, even non-English speaking countries like Germany, France, and Italy rank well in terms of the percentage of their people who speak the language. You look at the publication in science, the number of publications in English is increasing, and it is now at 93 or 94%. And you see very strong countries like Germany, the number of publication or the percentage of publications in that language is dropping and going down to 2 or 3%. French, the same, and so on. You look also at the academic programs offered in English in non-English speaking countries. The number of master's degrees are increasing sharply in the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, France, Sweden, France, Spain, Denmark, and so on. And that's why we need actually to do something. And some initiatives have already been taken in some countries to at least require some level of English. I heard the Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research in Morocco talking about that, imposing on students before they get their bachelor's degree or licence to reach certain level of English. And some countries are imposing that at the level of the master's and the PhD. Employability, that's a huge problem in most of the African countries. I think I will not actually spend time on this slide. Everyone is aware of that 57% of African workers are employed in low-skilled jobs, 33% in medium-skilled jobs, and just 10% in high-skilled jobs. So that's a a huge problem. And then when we look at education and scientific research, STEM is not as yet at the level it should be. So since I'm talking within the framework of a conference on energy, I thought I will talk about energy briefly, open a, I would say, kind of a parenthesis to talk about energy. I have chosen this this photo from Ouarzazate, which is not far from my birthplace, Zagora, because we need always to have hope, not only stay on the negative aspects. There are a lot of positive and success stories in Africa that we need to consider. So energy in Africa, again, a lot of problems. When you see the access to electricity, apart from North Africa, I mean, South Africa and 1 or 2 countries in the middle, most of the countries have very low access to electricity, down to 7%, for example, in Cote d'Ivoire. No, to 9%, 3% in one of the countries, 3% or 1% in one of the countries. So, and you know the effect on everything. On the health, a lot of people die because they use wood actually in their kitchen, and especially women and children. The effects on education, a lot of students are not actually performing in schools because they don't have electricity at home, and even schools do not have electricity. 90% of African primary schools lack electricity. When you see the power consumption in Africa, South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, it's something like 100 kilowatts per capita. Africa, the average of Africa is not good compared to North Africa, for example, and then there is no comparison with the West, with Europe or the United States. So I think that there is an opportunity here to do work in the area of energy. And I'm following the work which is done by our friend, Professor Ahmed and his team, and the different colleagues. I recognize also the work of my friends and colleagues from my university, Qadi Ayyad University in Marrakesh. And it is an opportunity to do work in the area of energy. And I've seen a very nice report, a new report about Africa, Renewable Energy Market Analysis, Africa and its regions, published in January 2022. And the link is given for that report. And the African Development Bank, as you know, has defined 5 high priorities for Africa, the high 5 for transforming Africa, and they put energy on top. It's the first priority for the World Bank, for the African Development Bank. So what we need to do, because people have done research, people have experimented a lot of things. Sometimes we need simply to adapt certain things from through the research, but we need to adopt those things to our realities and not take them as they are. And in the era of knowledge and intelligence, the development in all areas is intertwined and growing fast. And that's why we have 2 challenges. We have actually institutions in our countries in Africa, both higher education and scientific research institutions that are at the top, and they need to continue, because we need to follow the trend and try to compete with the other nations. And at the same time, we have institutions which are at the bottom, and we need to upgrade their level on all aspects, including the human capital, but also the infrastructure. So our institution need to be more entrepreneurial and use innovative pedagogical approaches research and development programs, and work closely with the social professional operators. And we have also a weakness in our institutions, which is the governance model. And the governance model needs today to be up to date. People have been talking about strategic planning, the culture of change, and continuous improvement, quality assurance, and the social responsibility. People were talking about smart. Today they added an ER to smart. It became smarter, specific for our activities and actions. They need to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based, and today even expanded and rewarded. So the challenge today is to train students for non-existing professions. You have students who enroll in universities today, but before they graduate, for 3, 4, 5 years later, maybe the subject area they were trained for or the job they've been trained for have disappeared. And that's why we need today not only to offer quality programs, but we need to insist on the what we call today the soft skills or the interpersonal skills, like analysis, critical thinking, and so on. And we see here also, we are today at the 5th industrial revolution, and the technology is really more and more replacing humans in several activities. So automation, and the 5th revolution is about robotics. So I will not go into the details, but it's good to look at the required skills that we need today to, I wouldn't use the word provide, we need to discuss, because we need this active learning, not simply students are sitting there and we feed them. So we need to do active learning, but yet we need to look at this, for example, 16 skill profiles, and include them in our programs, in our courses, in our projects, in our research and development as well. And I was talking to Professor Salim Omar earlier, and we talked about the lifelong learning. The lifelong learning is very important, and the permanent refreshment of our knowledge is required. So nobody can say today that it's it. That's it. I am a PhD, I published, and so on and so on. We keep learning while we are alive. So I'm a strong believer in quality assurance and accreditation. But actually accreditation, not the way it is done in many countries, when actually some research programs, some academic programs are accredited by the ministry through papers. So I'd rather actually look at the way it is done in the United States, when it is based on evidence and outcome. And in the steps, we have the site visit. We have actually peers, evaluators, go to universities, go to research centers, and see by themselves and compare what they see to what is on the self-assessment of the institution. Because accreditation is one way to enforce quality assurance in our academic and research institutions. Some reasons for hope. Again, I said it earlier when I showed the picture of Ouarzazate, of the solar field in Ouarzazate, Morocco. There are a lot of reasons for hope. And there are a lot, I said earlier, also a lot of success stories, a lot of institutions, and we can even benefit also from the diaspora. We have a lot of Africans today held in key positions in different domains, investment industry, but also in higher education and scientific research. So, and we can benefit from that and look at these success stories. But again, the key words here are active, entrepreneurial, and interdisciplinary. And I don't think there is anything new here, but it needs to be emphasized again and again. And of course, we belong to the world and we need internationalization. I feel sorry that our public institutions, for example, in Morocco, do not have this component. I really feel sorry that when I was working at Marrakesh University, that we are only Moroccans there. We need to inject some proportion of international faculty to benefit from the experience, and we need actually to do networking and work with the others. So everyone today is aware of the challenges, and I said it earlier, there is work being done. As I said earlier, I know personally ministers in Morocco, I know ministers in Cote d'Ivoire. Most of them are even from the field because they are themselves actually university professors and researchers, and they're working hard to improve what can be improved. To conclude, I would say that in form of recommendations that we need to look at our system of governance to ensure the sustainability of our institutions. And we need to give consideration to the public sector, and at the same time work closely with the social professional world. I mentioned it later. So we need to balance the public and private higher education and scientific research offerings, promote STEM studies, but we should not forget the general education, the old system, which is really discipline-based. I did a bachelor's degree in physical sciences, chemistry, and we were studying only chemistry. I think that today, from my perspective, I think we need to inject some general education also in there. So general knowledge is very important. And the ministry today, they're talking about also injecting soft skills and the interpersonal skills in the education system. So we need to adapt to the fifth, it's not even the fourth today, it's the fifth industrial revolution, and look at the set of skills and competencies required today to be in line with the fifth industrial revolution. The teaching and research, they go hand in hand. And that's why I keep telling my colleagues at the university, you cannot be a good university professor if you don't engage in research, because research feeds well the teaching and the learning. So I talked earlier about the involvement of the social professional world at all levels, and then the integrate research and development activities. We need actually to attract actually grants to our institutions and to work with the private sector, with the public institutions and the social professional sector in general, even outside the country. And there are lots of international organizations that also encourage research and offer support to research. And then, of course, we need to diversify the resources for our institutions. And it is done in a lot of institutions through research and development, through continuing education, through consulting with industry and so on. And then the culture of evaluation in order to be efficient and effective. And then last but not least, it's very important, and I think accreditation is the key to success, because accreditation imposes on institution some good form of quality assurance. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, thank you very much, Si Ahmed, Professor Ahmed Legrouri from Cote d'Ivoire. I remember you, he's Moroccan. He's graduated from Toulouse, from Glasgow. He teaches at the Al Akhawain University, and now as human resources, he's feeding Africa and he giving a lot of advice, and he's provost in Africa. Thank you very much for giving us this overview. I think it would be good if you can send us your PDF file, because this is a general overview of how the university should be. And you have also pointed out that the English is very important. And in the ranking process, it's a baseline, and A lot of university which are English speaking are ranked, and the French one are not. We have to think about it in Morocco, and to switch to English, I hope one day. But we start. Al-Akhawa University is in English. And other, I think, I believe some private university also in Morocco, they teach in English. But I saw, and Professor Ben Youfi told me that his student in master prefer to give their talk in English because they don't speak very good French. So thank you very much. So I will ask Salim to say something and to give the floor to the public.
Thank you, Prof. Ahmed, and thank you also, Prof. Both of you, Ahmed Legrouri and Alinawi. Really, it was a wonderful speech, presentation. I enjoyed it. So let's go and see any questions and feedback or any comments from the participants also. Anyone who wants to give a question, he can raise his hand.
I can take questions also in French, actually, if anyone.
Yeah.
I tried actually to speak slowly and
good.
Use plain English so that those who can follow. But I can also, if anyone wants to ask a question in French, I would be happy to address it.
Yeah.
French or also Spanish, as he said also.
No, not Spanish, German. Yeah, Spanish, yeah, I'll manage.
All right. So Prof. Ahmed Al-Ainawi.
Yes. Okay. I want to ask you about African education. How much the African folks or African students are motivated at the university? I would like to know if they are very much motivated and they work hard, or they have same problem that a lot of people, they stay at the university for many years and then they go out without any grad and so on. How it is in Africa, at least in your case?
As I said earlier, there are a lot of differences between countries in Africa. If I can speak for Côte d'Ivoire, for example, and Morocco, which I know to some extent, I would say that in these countries we have, let's say, two tracks for higher education. A track that offers quality education, that does not have a lot of problems, I would say. If you take, for example, engineering schools in Côte d'Ivoire and in Morocco, some business schools, some private institutions today, they offer quality education. And the problem is that these schools are sometimes elitist. So they take the best of the best. And of course, when you take students who are excellent from high school, usually you don't have any problem with them. They have motivation, knowledge, and they are actually, even they have plans for the future. So they perform well and they don't have any problem. On the other hand, you have the, what we call the free access or free entry institutions, because those engineering schools, business schools, private institutions, they are very selective. And though the others, they go to those free access, open access schools like School of Science, School of Law, School of Arts and Humanities for Sciences and so on. And then there are all the problems of the world. And I'm talking here about France, about Côte d'Ivoire and Morocco, because they have this system.
Yeah.
And the main challenge for those institutions is the overcrowding.
Okay.
Because when I was teaching in Marrakesh, for example, you'll go to an auditorium full of students, and sometimes they don't even have a seat. They sit on the floor, or they sit in the stairs and so on, and you lecture. And you lecture because even the possibility for interaction is not there, even if you are willing to interact and so on. And in those institutions, very often what you find those students who did not get admission to any quality institution. So the motivation is not there, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
they received their high school diploma with an average score. So the knowledge is not to the level and the motivation is not there. So, and that's why these institutions are suffering from a lot of problems, even sometimes strikes and so on, and the conditions. And I think we need to correct for that. We need to correct for that in finding some balance between these two tracks, between the quality track and the less quality track.
So you think the numerous clauses is very important, I guess, no?
Yeah, very important, because actually, as I told you earlier, most of the university presidents, for example, in Morocco, and I know some of them here in Cote d'Ivoire, and the deans, the faculty, the professors, and so on, everyone is aware of the challenge. And most of these people are really hard-working people, very serious, committed people, but the challenge is so large that they cannot actually handle it in a proper way. And of course, it's not their fault. It's the system that we need to look at and maybe come up with a new paradigm, a new way of doing higher education in those countries.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Prof. Ahmed. There is a question from Alia Azuzet. She's saying, do you think that finance issue is the important factor to do research? This is the first question. And the second, how we can qualify good researcher? Please, Prof.
Yes, money is very important for research. And from my modest experience, I am an experimental scientist. I was trained as a materials chemist in France and then a materials chemist in the United Kingdom. And when I went back, and I did something special. I did actually high resolution electron microscopy in the United Kingdom. So to have a microscope at that time in Morocco, it was impossible. And even if they wanted to give me one, I would say no, because to maintain a high resolution electron microscope at that time in the late 80s, it was impossible. So money is very important, of course. The more money you have, and there was a slide that showed actually the percentage of the GDP devoted to research. And you see South Korea, for example, there are 4% of their GDP is devoted to research. And of course, the Koreans are doing well in terms of higher education, in terms of research and development, in terms of innovation, proper intellectual property and patents and so on. So there is a link closely between the money you spend and the results you get for research and for higher education. Yet, there are a lot of places, and I remember actually Morocco spent a lot of money on higher education, and the result was somewhat actually not satisfactory. So sometimes we have the money, but the use of the money sometimes is not very well. So I would say that for a researcher in Africa, and I'm talking here about my modest experience, you need to engage. You need to engage. You should not wait for the money to come to engage. You engage first. You start doing something, and then you ask for the money. You ask your institution for the money, and also you apply to all these calls for applications, for grants, both at the national and the international level. Because I have seen colleagues in Moroccan universities who say, oh, I can't do research because I don't have the money, and they're not doing anything. And there are a lot of colleagues, and Ahmed knows a very large number of those that are in public universities that have actually engaged in research without any money from the university or very little money from their institution. And today they're able to do research that competes with the world. They're able to generate money from outside, to get grants from industry, from the city and so on, and even grants from international organizations. and they have partnerships. So of course, money is very important. And in Africa, you need to engage, and then the money will come.
Okay, thank you very much.
The
Thank you.
second question was, what was the second question? Was about the excellent researcher. The excellent researcher, I described the excellent researcher. The excellent researcher is the gentleman or the lady that says, since I am in a career as a university professor or as a researcher in a research center, so I have to do research. I cannot find any excuse not to do research. And they are committed, and they are serious and hardworking, and usually they are successful.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed Legrouri from Côte d'Ivoire. You have brought us a topic which is now in Morocco. You know that there are a lot of discussion with the Minister of Higher Education in this topic, huh?
Yeah.
And they are very much disappointed. They don't know how to handle stuff. Maybe they need your advice. I hope so. Thank you very much for being here with us. Your presentation will be available on our virtual learning university for those they want to see what you have to say, and also for the politics if you want to visit our VLU. Thank you very much.